The castle loomed like a silent sentinel over the valley, its black spires cutting into the pale moonlight. Mist curled around the ramparts, hiding the jagged cliffs below. Inside, the halls were quiet, save for the soft rustle of tapestries swaying in the cold draft. Shadows seemed to breathe in every corner, as if the stones themselves held the memory of centuries. Here, in this darkened kingdom, lived Lord Kale the Vampire King. Isolde moved through the corridors with silent steps, her hands gliding along the cold walls. She carried a tray with chalices of blood wine, each one carefully prepared for Kale's evening ritual. Her loyalty was absolute, her devotion unshaken. Even when the world whispered that to love a vampire was to court danger itself, she had pledged herself to him years ago, and that promise had shaped every day since. Kale sat in the throne room, the firelight throwing shadows across his pale face. His eyes, dark as the endless night, scanned the kingdom's maps spread before him. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of command. He was fearsome, powerful, and proud, and the people of the castle obeyed him without question. "Bring it closer," he said, his voice smooth as silk but edged with authority. Isolde stepped forward, placing the tray carefully before him. Kale's gaze barely acknowledged her presence as he reached for the chalice. "You worry too much," he said, sipping the blood wine without looking at her. "The northern borders are secure. The villagers are loyal. Nothing threatens us." Isolde's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to argue, to tell him she had seen signs, small disturbances at the edge of the forest, whispers of rebellion among humans daring to cross into his lands, but she held her tongue. Kale had grown accustomed to her counsel, yet he dismissed it so easily now, as if her words were mere echoes of her presence. "Yes, my lord," she said quietly, her voice steady, though her heart ached. Kale finally looked up, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. But just as quickly, it hardened again, returning to the mask of indifference he wore so easily. "See that the northern patrols are doubled. That should be enough. You may leave now." Isolde bowed and stepped back. As she walked away, she caught herself in the reflection of the polished marble floor. Her reflection seemed dimmer than usual, the candlelight flickering across her features like a warning. She wondered when her devotion had begun to feel like chains, when her love had begun to be taken for granted. That night, the wind howled through the castle towers, carrying whispers of old curses and secrets long buried. Isolde sat by the window of her chamber, gazing at the moonlit forest below. She thought of Kale, the man who had once treated her as more than a servant, more than a shadow in his halls. He had once asked her advice, had once sought her laughter, had once held her hand as if she were a treasure. Now, she felt like a ghost in her own home. The next morning, the castle stirred with its usual rhythm guards patrolling the outer walls, servants scurrying through the halls, and Kale's advisors whispering behind closed doors. Isolde moved through it all like a shadow herself, unnoticed, yet aware of every detail. She found herself in the training yard, watching Kale spar with a visiting vampire warrior. His movements were fluid, deadly, and precise. Yet even in this display of power, there was a distance in his eyes, a detachment from those who stood by him. Isolde could not remember the last time he had truly looked at her as he once had, with warmth, with care. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "She's been quiet these past days," said one of the younger servants. "Do you think she's angry?" "She's always calm," another replied. "But I think even the Queen of Shadows would notice her absence if she left." Isolde's lips pressed into a thin line. She had no desire to leave. Not yet. But she needed Kale to notice her absence, to understand that her devotion was not a given, that her loyalty was not without limits. Later that day, Kale summoned her. His voice carried through the halls, echoing like distant thunder. Isolde approached, her heart steady though her hands trembled slightly. She had prepared herself for this moment, the confrontation she had long feared but knew was necessary. "You've been distant," Kale said, his tone not accusatory but curious, almost as if he had only just realized the truth. "Tell me, why do you hesitate?" Isolde held his gaze, steady and unwavering. Because, my lord, I am more than your shadow. I have watched your pride blind you, and I have waited for you to see me as more than a servant. I love you, but I cannot continue without respect. Cale's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something he rarely showed: surprise, perhaps even fear. He had never imagined that his devotion could be questioned, that the woman who had given herself to him so fully could draw a line. You dare speak to me like this? His voice was low, dangerous, yet not cruel. I dare, because I care, she said. I have given you everything, and yet you take it as though it is owed. I will not vanish from your life, but I will not be ignored either. Cale stared at her, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled. Shadows danced across the walls, and the weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Then, with a dismissive motion, he turned back to his maps. Very well, he said, his tone light but unreadable. Do as you will. But remember, the northern forests are stirring. A rebellion could rise, and you will be needed. Isolde left the chamber without another word, her heart aching but resolute. She would step back, she decided, let him feel the void her absence created. Perhaps only then would he understand the depth of her devotion, the cost of taking her for granted. The night fell again over the castle, colder and darker than before. Isolde wandered the outer towers, gazing at the moonlight, reflecting on the distant lake. Her mind drifted to the humans in the villages below, to the whispering winds carrying secrets she could not yet share. She wondered how long it would take for Cale to realize what he had lost, what he might lose if he continued to dismiss her. Suddenly, a scream pierced the still night, echoing from the northern borders. Isolde's pulse quickened. Her instincts, honed over years of loyalty and vigilance, told her that danger had arrived. She ran toward the sound, her cloak billowing behind her. At the edge of the forest, she saw movement figures slipping through the trees, carrying torches, weapons, and an unmistakable intent to strike. She realized immediately that Cale's guards were outnumbered, and the northern village could be in peril. She raced back to the castle, hoping to warn him in time. But when she reached the throne room, Cale was already preparing to ride out with his men. She tried to speak, to urge caution, but he waved her off. I know what I must do, he said. You will stay here. It is safer. Isolde's hands clenched at her sides. She had seen this before: his refusal to heed her warnings, his pride blinding him to the smallest truths. She wanted to argue, to force him to listen, but something inside her stayed her words. Instead, she turned away, retreating into the shadows, her chest tight with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Perhaps this distance, this quiet withdrawal, would finally teach him that her devotion was not endless, that love, even in its purest form, could be strained to the breaking point. As Cale rode toward the forest with his men, the wind howled through the towers, carrying the scent of coming blood and betrayal. Isolde watched from the castle walls, silent and unseen, her heart aching yet firm. She did not know if he would survive the night, or if her absence had already sown the seeds of disaster. But one thing was certain: the shadows of devotion were not so easily dismissed. And tonight, Cale would begin to understand, whether he wished to or not, the cost of taking her for granted. The northern forest stretched like a dark sea beneath the cold moonlight. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets that only those who listened carefully could understand. Cale rode at the head of his men, his black cloak flowing behind him. His eyes were fixed ahead, sharp and commanding, yet he felt a faint unease he could not name. He had ignored Isolde's warning. He had believed in his own strength, in the loyalty of his guards, in the supremacy of his kingdom. Yet something prickled at the edges of his mind, a shadow of doubt he refused to acknowledge. Meanwhile, high above the forest on the castle walls, Isolde watched. Her hands rested on the cold stone, her breath steady, though her heart raced. She had not come to fight, she had come to observe, to see if Cale could survive the dangers she had predicted. But fear tightened her chest as she realized the risks he faced. The first signs appeared as distant flickers of torchlight moving between the trees. Kale's men tightened their formation, swords drawn, eyes scanning the darkness, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch. Every sound seemed louder in the silence of the night. Kale's confidence began to waver as he saw the enemy emerge. Human rebels, armed and determined, their faces hardened by fear and desperation. They had not expected the Vampire King to move so swiftly, yet their courage was undeniable. "Hold the line," Kale commanded, his voice echoing through the trees. His men obeyed instantly, forming a defensive circle around him. Yet even as he fought, he realized that numbers alone might not save them. The humans were clever, moving with the shadows, using the forest to their advantage. Somewhere in the castle, Isolde's heart tightened. She could see the danger Kale had walked into, and every instinct told her he should not face it alone. But she also knew that stepping in directly would not help. He needed to feel the cost of ignoring her. He needed to understand, through his own struggle, that her devotion was not endless. Kale swung his sword with precision, cutting through attackers with skill and power. His men followed his lead, though exhaustion and fear began to show in their movements. For the first time, Kale felt the fragility of his own power. Without Isolde's guidance, without her careful preparation and watchfulness, he realized how vulnerable he truly was. The battle raged on. Torches flared in the darkness, illuminating faces twisted with anger and determination. Kale's mind raced, trying to predict the enemy's movements, trying to stay ahead of their strategies. And then he saw a group of rebels attempting to flank his men, moving silently through the shadows, intending to strike where the defense was weakest. Panic rose in Kale's chest. He shouted commands, trying to redirect his forces, but the chaos of the battle made every move uncertain. His guards fought bravely, but even they began to falter under the pressure of the clever enemy. From the castle walls, Isolde's eyes widened. She knew the forest too well, had studied its twists and traps. If Kale did not act quickly, the flank could overwhelm him, and the night could end in tragedy. She clenched her fists, torn between fear and anger. "You should have listened," she whispered to the wind, her voice lost among the trees. Her heart ached with frustration. She loved him, yet his arrogance had led him into danger. Every movement, every decision Kale had made tonight reminded her why she had distanced herself. She could not protect him from his pride. Kale sensed something shift in the battle. His men were still fighting, but exhaustion and injury began to tell their story. One of his closest guards fell, and for a moment, Kale felt the sharp sting of fear he had never admitted to himself. His own life, his kingdom, perhaps everything he had built, was at risk. And then, in the midst of the chaos, he saw her. A flash of movement in the shadows, a figure watching, but not intervening. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. Kale's chest tightened as he recognized the figure Isolde. She had not come to fight. She had come to see, to witness what he would do without her by his side. A sudden realization struck him like a blade. He had taken her for granted, assumed her loyalty would never falter, never imagined that she might step back, and now, confronted with his own vulnerability, he felt a sharp pang of regret. Her absence had created this risk. Her silence had made him blind. Kale fought harder, not just for victory, but for the thought of her watching him, judging him, hoping for him to see. His movements became sharper, more precise, tempered with an urgency he had never known before. He had always relied on strength alone, but now he understood that wisdom, caution, and foresight qualities Isolde had always embodied were just as vital. The rebels were clever, but Kale's desperation gave him clarity. He began to anticipate their attacks, redirect his men with skill, and use the forest to his advantage. Slowly, the tide of battle shifted. The humans, brave but unprepared for such leadership, began to falter. Still, the fight was not over. A sudden cry rang out. A guard had been cornered, screaming for help. Kale's eyes darted to the direction of the sound. If he did not act quickly, his man would be lost. The thought struck him harder than any blade ever could. This was what he had ignored all these years. Isolde's guidance had always been his safety net, the shield that made his power complete. Without her, even he, the Vampire King, was vulnerable. He moved like a shadow through the forest, cutting a path to his fallen guard, his heart pounding not just with the thrill of battle, but with the realization of his mistake. He was alive, yes, but only barely, and more importantly, he had finally understood the value of the woman he had taken for granted. Back at the castle, Isolde exhaled quietly, her chest heavy with emotion. She had hoped this night would awaken him, make him see the truth, but she had not expected the fear, the danger, or the consequences. Her distance had a weight she had not anticipated. Could he survive this night? Could he truly learn from it? The battle ended with Kale victorious. Though exhausted and shaken, his men regrouped, tending to wounds and collecting themselves under the dim light of torches. Kale stood in the forest clearing, his black cloak torn, his armor scratched, his mind racing. For the first time, he felt the emptiness of his power without Isolde by his side, not her presence as a servant, but her wisdom, her heart, her devotion. He knew he had to make a choice. Pride could no longer blind him. He could not continue taking her love for granted. But how would she respond? How could he earn back the devotion he had neglected, the trust he had almost destroyed? As he returned to the castle, the night seemed darker, colder, as if the forest itself whispered warnings. He moved quickly through the halls, searching for the one person who could make him whole again, and there, in the shadowed corridor, he found her. Isolde's eyes met his, wide with a mixture of fear, anger, and longing. "Kale," she said softly, her voice steady, "you have seen the cost of your pride. Do you understand now?" Kale's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, to beg, but words felt small, insufficient. Instead, he lowered his gaze, bowing his head in humility for the first time in centuries. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low and firm. "I understand. I have been blind. I will not be so again." Isolde studied him, searching for truth, for sincerity, for proof that he had truly changed. Her heart ached with cautious hope. Perhaps he could learn, perhaps their bond could survive the night's trials. But even as she took a step toward him, a distant sound reached her ears. A movement in the shadows outside the castle walls. Faint, but deliberate. Something lingered in the forest, watching, waiting, taking advantage of the chaos of the night. The danger was not over. Kale had survived the battle, but the war both within the kingdom and within their hearts was far from finished. The Vampire King and his loyal protector stood in silence, the echoes of the night surrounding them. Their eyes met, heavy with unspoken words, longing, and the fragile thread of trust stretched taut. And beyond the castle, in the dark forest, a new threat stirred, ready to test them both. The forest was quiet now, but the air carried a tension that made every shadow feel alive. Kale walked beside Isolde through the winding paths, his cloak trailing on the damp earth. He had returned victorious from the northern battle, but victory felt hollow. The victory of swords meant little if the heart remained blind. He had seen the cost of taking her devotion for granted. The fear in the eyes of his men, the near loss of life he had narrowly avoided, and the silent disappointment he glimpsed in Isolde, all of it pressed on him. For the first time, Kale felt the weight of regret heavier than any blade he had ever wielded. Isolde walked beside him, quiet and steady. Her arms were folded, her gaze fixed on the ground ahead. She did not speak, but Kale could feel her presence like a living thing, full of tension and caution. She had not forgiven him yet, perhaps she never would, if he failed to prove his sincerity. The night deepened, and the mist rose from the forest floor. Kale had chosen to take her to a hidden sanctuary, a place he had once visited in solitude, where the moonlight broke through the thick canopy and the river sang softly against the rocks. It was a place of reflection and thought, where even a king could confront the truths he often ignored. Why did you follow me? Kael asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. You could have stayed in the castle, safe from harm. I needed to see. Isolde replied simply, her voice calm but firm. To see if you would survive without me. To see if you could understand the cost of ignoring me. And to see if you would change. Kael's chest tightened. Her words were like a mirror, reflecting the man he had been, the proud, blind ruler who assumed love and loyalty were endless, who had walked heedless into danger without thought for the one person who always stood at his side. I understand now, Kael said. I cannot let my pride rule me anymore. I see what I've done, the mistakes I've made. I was blind to your devotion. And I am sorry, Isolde. She looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth. Words are easy, Kael. Actions are harder. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Words alone would not be enough. He needed to prove it, to show that he had learned. That he valued her, not just for her loyalty, but for her wisdom, her courage, her heart. Their walk continued through the sanctuary. Moonlight spilling over the river, illuminating their path. Kael's mind raced with plans. Not for conquest or power, but for redemption. He would face danger, yes, but this time he would act with thought, with care, with respect for the woman who had always been more than a shadow. Suddenly, a rustling from the trees made them both pause. Kael instinctively moved in front of Isolde, his hand on his sword. The forest seemed to hold its breath. From the shadows emerged figures, creatures of darkness that neither human nor ordinary vampire called friend. They were remnants of old conflicts. Enemies Kael had believed defeated, now returned. Their eyes glimmered red in the moonlight, and they moved with silent, deadly intent. Kael's heart pounded. He had faced death before, but never with such uncertainty. The creatures were cunning, coordinated, and they sought to exploit his weaknesses. He turned to Isolde. You should stay behind me, he said firmly, his voice a mix of command and care. Isolde's eyes met his. No, she said. I am not behind you. I am beside you. If you fail, we fail together. You must understand that strength alone is not enough. Our bond, our trust, is what gives us power. Kael felt a surge of emotion. Her words cut deeper than any sword could. He nodded, understanding her meaning. This was more than a battle. This was a test, not of strength, but of his ability to value and protect the one he loved. The creatures attacked. Kael moved like a shadow, his sword flashing in the moonlight. His movements were sharper now, tempered with the awareness that Isolde's trust had been strained, that every strike he made mattered not only for survival but for redemption. Isolde did not falter. She moved with agility and courage, using her knowledge of the forest and her wits to support him. They worked together seamlessly, a dance of shadows and steel. Yet Kael knew that victory alone would not repair the fractures between them. He needed her to see that he had changed, that he had learned humility and respect. The battle raged on, each movement a test of skill, trust, and understanding. Kael began to see what he had taken for granted, the courage, the intelligence, the steadfast heart of the woman who had never abandoned him, even when he ignored her. Her presence was not a convenience. It was a gift. Finally, with a combined effort, they repelled the creatures. The forest fell silent again, broken only by the soft flow of the river and their ragged breathing. Kael's cloak was torn, his armor scratched, and his hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the realization of what he had learned. He turned to Isolde, searching her face for a sign, any sign that she believed he had changed. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, but there was a spark, a flicker of hope, of acknowledgement. I see now, Kael said softly. I see what I have lost by taking you for granted. I will never do so again. I swear it. Isolde stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. Words, again, are easy. But tonight, you have shown courage. You have faced danger with awareness, with care. Perhaps this is a start. Kale felt a weight lift from his chest. He had not fully earned her forgiveness, but he had begun the path. The path would be long, filled with trials, both in the world and within their hearts. But for the first time, he felt the possibility of redemption. As they made their way back to the castle, the wind carried a new chill. Kale's senses, sharpened by centuries of life, detected movement in the shadows. Quiet, deliberate, and watchful. The creatures had been only the first test. Something else lingered, a threat he had not yet fully faced. Isolde noticed it too. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the darkened trees. "We are not safe yet," she whispered. "The night is not over, and danger still waits." Kale nodded, gripping her hand briefly, a silent promise that he would protect her, that he would not falter again. Together, they moved forward, shadows among shadows, aware that their bond, tested by pride, fear, and absence, was now their greatest strength. Yet even in this moment of fragile hope, the forest seemed alive with unseen eyes. Somewhere, in the distance, a figure watched, waiting for the moment to strike. Kale's lessons had begun. But the true trials, both for the kingdom and for their hearts, were only just beginning. The castle loomed ahead, dark and silent under the silver light of the moon. Kale and Isolde moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The forest had grown unnaturally quiet, as though it were holding its breath. Kale's heart beat steadily, yet every instinct screamed that danger still lingered. The events of the past nights, the battle in the northern forest, the creatures they had fought, and the moments of fear and revelation had changed him. He had learned humility, the value of Isolde's devotion, and the cost of taking love for granted. But now, as he sensed the presence of something watching, he realized that understanding alone would not be enough. To truly redeem himself, he would have to prove it through action. Isolde's hand brushed his, a subtle reminder that she was not behind him, nor merely beside him. She was his equal in courage, his partner in survival. Her calm, measured gaze scanned the shadows ahead, eyes narrowed with vigilance. She had forgiven nothing yet, but the quiet acknowledgement of his growth had softened her resolve. A sudden rustle of leaves shattered the stillness. Kale raised his sword, muscles tense, eyes sharp. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in black, moving with silence that made even the forest still seem loud. Its presence radiated power, cold and calculated. Kale stepped in front of Isolde, his body a shield. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but edged with steel. The figure tilted its head, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "A shadow of what you have ignored," it said, voice like wind through dead leaves. "I have come to test whether your strength and your heart are true." Kale understood immediately. This was the final challenge, a force that would demand not only his skill, but the depth of his respect for Isolde, his understanding of devotion, and his willingness to change. The figure lunged, moving with unnatural speed. Kale met the attack with precision, parrying and striking with a focus sharpened by lessons learned. But every move, every defense, reminded him of Isolde, her guidance, her unwavering presence through years of loyalty. He could not fail, not now, not after what he had learned. Isolde moved alongside him, her agility and insight guiding them both. She anticipated the figure's movements, directing Kale subtly. A dance of strategy and trust. Their coordination was seamless, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect and care. Kale felt a warmth in the partnership, a bond strengthened by trials. And he knew that this was the true source of their power. The battle pressed on, shadows clashing with steel, sparks flying with every strike. Kale realized that brute strength alone would not win this fight. He had to think, to adapt, to listen not just to his instincts, but to Isolde's wisdom. Every maneuver, every step, became a testament to the lessons he had learned. Finally, with a coordinated strike, They forced the figure back. It stumbled, not from weakness, but from recognition their bond, their unity, was something it could not break. Kale pressed forward, offering no cruelty, only determination and focus. The figure paused, then stepped back into the shadows. You have learned, but the test is never truly over, it whispered before disappearing into the forest. Kale lowered his sword, chest heaving with exhaustion. The threat had vanished, but the realization of the trial remained. He turned to Isolde, whose eyes were calm, steady, and yet filled with emotion. You have changed, she said softly. I see it now. You have faced danger not only with strength, but with understanding, with care, with respect for what I give and what I am. Perhaps you are worthy of my trust again. Kale stepped closer, hesitating only for a moment before taking her hands in his. Not just your trust, Isolde. I want your partnership, your heart, your devotion not as something owed, but as something we share. A faint smile curved her lips. Then we begin anew. But know this. Loyalty, love, and trust must be nurtured. They are not granted freely, nor should they be taken lightly. Kale nodded, understanding fully. He had been blind to her presence, blind to the strength of her heart. Now, he vowed silently, he would never take her devotion for granted again. The first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting golden light over the castle towers. Kale and Isolde stood atop the highest wall, gazing at the world beyond. The forest below, once threatening, now seemed calm, holding its secrets in silence. Do you feel it? Kale asked, his voice gentle. The night is ending, and we have survived it together. Yes, Isolde replied, her eyes meeting his, and we are stronger for it. Not because the danger is gone, but because we faced it together and because we understand each other better than before. Kale drew a deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill his lungs. He realized that the kingdom, the battles, the threats, they were all part of the world they inhabited. But what mattered most was the bond they had rebuilt, the respect, the love, and the trust that now flowed between them like a living force. As they descended into the castle, the servants and guards watched with quiet awe. Kale's demeanor had changed not just in humility, but in presence. He moved with purpose, but with gentleness. Where arrogance had once ruled, understanding now prevailed, and Isolde walked beside him, her head held high, proud and unafraid, her devotion no longer assumed, but freely given. Inside the throne room, Kale placed his hand over hers in a gesture that had once been unthinkable. An acknowledgement of equality, of partnership. You are more than my shadow, Isolde. You are my strength, my guidance, and my heart. Isolde's gaze softened. And you are learning, Kale. That is all I have ever asked. I do not need perfection. I need understanding, care, and respect. Kale bowed slightly, not in submission, but in honor. He had learned the weight of pride, the danger of taking love for granted, and the strength that came from shared devotion. For the first time, he felt complete, not in power, not in victory, but in connection. The castle was no longer merely a seat of authority. It had become a home, a place where loyalty and love could thrive without fear or neglect. The shadows that had once loomed over Kale's heart had begun to recede, replaced by the light of understanding, respect, and shared purpose. But even as they stood together, a faint movement in the distant forest reminded them that the world outside remained unpredictable. Kale tightened his grip on Isolde's hand, not with fear, but with resolve. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, their bond stronger than any danger. Isolde leaned slightly against him, her presence a silent reassurance. We have survived the night, she said softly. Now, we face the day together. Kale nodded, feeling a rare smile lift the corners of his lips. Together, he agreed, his voice steady and certain. The sun rose over the horizon, bathing the castle and the surrounding lands in warm, golden light. Birds stirred in the trees, and the wind carried the scent of new beginnings. Kale and Isolde walked side by side through the castle halls, not as master and servant, but as equals, partners, and guardians of each other's hearts. In that moment, Kale understood fully. Power meant nothing without respect. Strength was empty without trust. And devotion was a gift, not a guarantee. He had been tested, humbled, and redeemed, and through it all, Isolde had remained steadfast, her patience and courage guiding him toward the man he could truly be. The castle, once a place of cold shadows and whispered commands, now felt alive with the possibility of love and trust restored. And as Kale and Isolde stepped onto the balcony overlooking the valley, they knew that together, they could face whatever darkness remained in the world. For their bond was forged not in fear or obligation, but in understanding, courage, and mutual devotion. Epilogue, resolution. The Vampire King had learned the weight of pride and the cost of taking love for granted. Isolde had taught him, through patience, distance, and unwavering devotion, the true meaning of trust and partnership. The night's trials had forged them into equals, not by power alone, but by shared courage and respect. And though the world beyond the castle walls remained unpredictable, they faced it together stronger, wiser, and bound by a love that was now chosen, understood, and unbreakable.